Hi, my name is Laura Kunz. I recently turned 35 years old and I currently live in Jupiter, Florida with my husband Travis of 6 years and our little girl Kennedy, who is almost 3 years old. Travis and I are both originally from Cincinnati. We were born and raised in Anderson Township, and both of our families have very deep roots here. I am actually a sixth generation Cincinnatian, and Travis's family were actually some of the original land developers of Anderson Township. So they developed the land actually right up the street here that was the Beachmont Mall and is now the Anderson Town Center. In addition to all of those things, I am a person in long-term recovery from alcohol misuse disorder, and I have not found it necessary to take a mood or mind-altering substance since November 26th of 2008. I also work in the addiction treatment field, and I have since 2009. So addiction treatment really looks different for every individual. It's based on where they are in terms of the progression of the disease. It's based on their willingness and what they are willing to commit to and to do. But what is recommended based on the research that we do have on substance misuse disorders is that at least 90 days of treatment in a structured, sober environment produces the best results in terms of long-term sobriety. So honestly, the longer the better. The longer that an individual can stay in a structured, supportive, sober environment, the better chances they do have of long-term success. What I tell people who have a friend or a family member who is struggling with this disease and they want to look into getting help for that person, I tell them to gather the facts and to gather the resources. So by the facts, I mean the basics. What is that person using? What substances are they using? How long have they been using those substances? Have they been diagnosed with anything else other than substance use? A psychiatric illness? Is there anything medical going on? If those things are present, it's helpful to have documentation of that, any medical records. Another thing is, how do you plan to pay for or cover their treatment? Do they have insurance? And if so, it's helpful to have a copy of that insurance card. These are all things that you're going to do to prepare to reach out to the resources that you gather. So when I say gather resources, I mean do your research, look at programs that might be a fit for your loved one. And you know, today it's a lot of people are going to the internet to find those resources, and unfortunately it's not a trustworthy place today. It's actually can be a dangerous place to find a treatment center for a loved one. So I suggest that they find the resource the same way they would any other healthcare resource. You know, how do you find a primary care physician? How do you find a new gynecologist? You know, a lot of people will ask the people that they know, and they'll ask people in their network and people that they trust. And you know, the unfortunate thing about addiction is that a lot of people still don't really talk about it. So you might not know someone in your immediate circle who has dealt with this individually or with a loved one. You know, you may not feel that you have those resources, but I guarantee if you put it out there to your circle, there will be someone who knows someone. Another suggestion that I have to gather resources is to contact a licensed or certified professional in your area or even nationally, because someone who is licensed or certified and actively working with people with substance misuse disorder, they will have resources that they will be more than willing to share with you, and those resources will be those that they trust or that they might have referred people to before. One resource that I often suggest to family members and loved ones is intervention. So intervention isn't always like the show on A&E where it's this big dramatic event. There are many different types of intervention, and there are many very professional and highly experienced interventionists based all over the country who your family or your group can hire and work with to help facilitate the treatment process. It's especially helpful when your loved one is not willing to go to treatment. They may not be at a place where they have reached the stage of change of readiness to get help for themselves, and intervention really helps create that. Additionally, interventionists often will work with your family or with your group while the person is in treatment. So they act as a bridge between the treatment provider and you guys, and they are able to communicate things that might get miscommunicated otherwise. They also provide support after treatment, which is very important. As I mentioned in the beginning, at least 90 days of support is what we know based on research is most effective. So the longer you have support for the addicted person, and even better if it's for everyone involved, the better the outcome is going to be. Some of the challenges to working in the addiction treatment field: number one is we are working with individuals who have a disease that don't know they have a disease. So that in itself is a challenge. Additionally, it is really difficult, especially today, to witness individuals and families who are so open and so willing to get help, but they don't have the resources to do it. And that is extremely challenging, especially in my role being a lot of times the first call for a family when, I'm talking to them and they're ready, and, and really all that they will have access to would be something that has funding or state funding, and there's a wait list and those beds are full. And so it's talking about what those next steps are, and that's always really challenging. Another challenge of working in this field is, for me, working with families and specifically parents of people who are struggling with this disease. I am a parent, and I know the power of that love that exists. And to put myself in their shoes and to be with them in those moments of incredible pain and despair and hopelessness, not knowing if their child is going to get help, not knowing if they get help, if it's going to work, if they're ever going to sustain long-term sobriety, that can be a real challenge. Compassion fatigue is something that, honestly, I don't think is talked about enough around the addiction epidemic that we have going on in this country. There are so many people who are on the front lines of this, and they are working with the parents, they're working with the families, they're working with the clients, and it's heavy. And I know that there are 3 characteristics to look out for in regards to compassion fatigue. It's mental exhaustion, feelings of ineffectiveness at work, and cynicism. And so personally, what I try to do is I try to remain self-aware enough to recognize those characteristics in myself when they start to go on. And this is something that I've dealt with. And so what I do and what I have done is I will tell my loved ones, I will tell my immediate supervisor, this is something that I'm recognizing that's going on for me, and I'm actively working to get some help for myself. And what that help looks like for me is, I was given advice early on working in this field by a really, really respected professional. And he said, always make sure that you are either have a therapist for yourself or that you are working some sort of program of recovery. So for me, being a person in long-term recovery from a substance misuse disorder, I have always worked a 12-step program. That's something that really works for me. It works for me in my own recovery, but it also helps give me the strength that I need to continue doing the work in the field. You walk into a room of a 12-step meeting, and it's this beautiful cross-section of people. And these are people that have seen the absolute bottom of their disease, because some people are court-ordered to be in a 12-step meeting, but most of them, they're volunteers. They are choosing to be there. They're choosing to better themselves. They're choosing to work the 12 steps. So really going there and hearing their stories of how bad it got and where they are today, it reminds me that some of these clients and the families and the mothers and the fathers that I'm helping, there's hope right around the corner. Why are we seeing so many people struggle with addictions? There is the obvious. There's the opioid epidemic. Also, I think that our society is seeing a lot of addiction because the more that we connect externally with technology, our cell phones, the internet, Facebook, the less that we are connecting with ourselves and the less that we are connecting with each other. And in my experience, sobriety requires that. It requires the ability to connect with yourself, to go inside, to be still, to be quiet, and to self-regulate. How important is a support system for long-term recovery? I think it's one of the most important factors. Addiction is as much a thinking disease as it is a drinking and drugging disease. So it is invaluable to have people in your life that you can go to with your thinking disease, and it's a judgment-free zone. The most rewarding parts of my profession, number one, are the success stories. And being with a client or a family in those first moments of the journey to get help, and just watching where they are today based on where they were. And the best thing is when they share that with me, or when I run into someone who I've helped along the way and I see them and they are transformed, and I get to be a part of people's transformation process, and it's an absolute honor. The other most rewarding thing about my profession are the people in my profession. So our industry has caught a lot of negative press recently for some of the bad players that are doing some bad things. But what we are not getting attention for are the amazing people doing amazing things. The greatest people that I have met in my 35 years on this earth work in the addiction treatment field. These are selfless people. These are people that you don't know half of the things that they do to help you and to help your family and to help those already in recovery or needing to get into recovery. And the support that the people in the industry give to each other. That has truly helped. I know me personally, it has helped me sustain, 8-9 years in this field so far. We are all working with this condition on a daily basis, and we truly can understand and relate to what that is like, to what that's like to, be answering your phone at 6 a.m., 10 o'clock at night, on weekends, on holidays, because you don't want to miss that call from that person who's ready to get help, or that family member who has done their research, they've gathered the facts, and they're ready to get that person help. You don't want to miss that call. And to have the support system of people who understand that is everything. So I started drinking alcohol at age 13. And by the age of 13, I was already really involved in athletics and pretty successful in athletics. And so when I found alcohol, it was the perfect thing to give me that release that I needed, and honestly to keep me relevant socially because I spent so much time swimming and so much time playing soccer. And so really from the very first time I drank alcohol, I say that I drank alcoholically. I would drink to blackout. I would drink to oblivion. That's just what I did. And I didn't know that that wasn't normal. That's just what I did. So throughout high school, I, would drink on the weekends, and I just became kind of a party girl, and I was really social. And what I like to say is that one by one, I just started giving away the things that mattered to me. I gave away my athletics. I gave away my really solid 4.0 GPA. I gave away my relationships with my siblings and my family. And, by the time that I reached college, I was really just kind of living for the next adventure and living for the next party. And, it's something that no one would have really known about me. I always maintained the facade of having it together, of being a good student, of having healthy relationships socially and within my family. But there was a consistent internal struggle going on there that no one knew. and that I wasn't self-aware enough to know at the time either. And by my early 20s, I had gone to 3 different colleges. I had had about 4 different majors. I just was confused. I was lost. I had really partied myself out of all 3 schools. I didn't get kicked out, but I should have. And I ended up back in Cincinnati, and I moved into my parents' basement at age 20, and I was that person. I was back in Cincinnati. I enrolled in the University of Cincinnati, but I felt like a loser. All my friends were still away at school, and they were starting internships, and they were starting careers, and I was back here in my parents' basement. And so at age 20, I got my real estate license in addition to being enrolled at the University of Cincinnati. And I started my career as what I call a fake real estate agent. My mother has a successful real estate career here in town. And I decided I was going to partner up with her, and I was going to start my career in conjunction with going to school. And so I moved up to Mount Adams, and I got a little apartment up there. And it was my dream come true for the way that I liked to drink. I could walk to the bars, I could walk to UDF to get anything that I needed, and I met a great group of people up there. We all ranged in age from age, I think I was probably one of the youngest at age 20, 21 to age 55, 60. And, we would all meet up at the bars, and we would have a great time. And when I turned 23, that's when I say the progression of my disease really took off. We know that addiction is a progressive illness. And the saying in recovery is you turn from a cucumber into a pickle. And once you become a pickle, you can never become a cucumber again. And at age 23, I became a pickle. And I was going out 7 nights a week. I was not showing up for my responsibilities as a real estate agent. I would sleep until 11, 12 in the afternoon because I was so sick and I was so hungover. Drugs are not a part of my story. I only drank alcohol. I was actually a person that the DARE program worked very well for in elementary school. I was very much afraid to touch any other substance. And so by the time that I was 25, the alcoholic cycle that I was in had really physically worn me down. So I got to a point to where I really had had enough, but I didn't know what else I could do. It's kind of funny. I remember I actually filled out an application to join the Peace Corps. I looked into moving to different states. I had not really identified that alcohol could be causing all of my problems. So in the spring of 2008 is when I had my first of a series of spiritual awakenings that led me into recovery. And I was sitting on my back porch in Mount Adams. I had been out all night, and I was kind of coming out of that fog. And I just remember looking up, and I saw the wind blow through the trees in my backyard, and I saw the sunlight come through. And I just had this moment, this moment of clarity. And so I heard, not audibly necessarily, but I heard a voice within myself say, "You don't have to live this way anymore." And I just remember thinking, what? Like, I don't? And it was a really incredible, powerful moment for me because no one had told me that I didn't have to live that way anymore. I had never had the thought that I didn't. That's all I knew how to do, and that's the only way that I knew how to live. And so from that moment on, I had a fire in me to find out what else was there, what else was out there, how else could life look for me. And so within a couple weeks, I had scheduled myself several interviews down in Florida to interview for a job. And, I had arranged everything in Cincinnati for me to be able to relocate. I had that group of friends that I had in Mount Adams, they were amazing, but it was pretty difficult, to make those changes, still kind of being in that same environment. So I moved to Florida in June of 2008. And I just remember making the drive down, and I had so much hope. I don't think I had ever felt hope before, to be honest with you. I think my life prior to that awakening, it just always felt like it was in black and white. And it felt like I never really understood life. Like there was some piece that I was missing, of how to be happy and of how to live that I just hadn't really known. And so I just felt so much hope going on this kind of new journey. And so when I got to Florida, it took me a couple months. It took me, I hadn't really identified alcohol as the problem until I got to Florida and I was by myself. I didn't have all of those friends, that were the problem. I didn't have, my family system up here that they would never see me as anything but the girl growing up. I didn't have those external factors. I just had me. And I'll never forget the night that, I was drinking wine by myself. I had to work the next morning, but it was one glass after the next and then another bottle and then another bottle. And I just remember pouring that third bottle down the drain and saying, I can't not drink alcohol. I realized I could not drink once I had alcohol in my system. And so at that point, I just remember, honestly, I hit my knees one night in my apartment and I asked who I knew, the God that I knew at that time, for help. And, over the next couple weeks, I went to the internet and I gathered resources. And like I said earlier, that was unfortunate. I came across some resources that really weren't that helpful, or they were CDs on what alcohol does to the brain. And, they were asking me for quite a bit more money to give me quite a bit more help. And, it wasn't a good situation. So in November of 2008, I was actually on Facebook, and my youngest brother at the time my youngest brother at the time was the quarterback for the Anderson High School football team, and it was the state championship game. And my whole family was at the game, and I wrote a thing on Facebook, and I said, really missing my family tonight. Wish I was in Cincinnati. Like, go Daniel. That's my brother's name. And a friend of mine from high school wrote me a private message, and he said, you can watch the game at this link, and it was a link to watch the game live. And honestly, this guy wasn't someone who was necessarily a friend. He just was someone that I knew of from Anderson. He was 4 years ahead of me in high school. He was Mr. Perfect and the cool guy, and I'm like, why is he helping me? And so we started talking, and he asked me what brought me to Florida. And I was just too ashamed. I was too ashamed to say, I came down here, my life was a mess, and I came down here to figure it out. And so I asked him what brought him down to Florida, and he said rehab. And I was absolutely floored. This was not a guy that in my picture of alcoholism or addiction that I thought would struggle with this. And, so it was a real moment of, wow, if he can struggle, I can struggle. And so I asked him, what did you do? I'm suffering too. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I got these CDs off the internet and he said, well, I've maintained mine through a 12-step program. And, honestly, at the time, I had a stigma in my mind around a 12-step program. And, so nothing really came of that conversation. But then, we were both flying home to Cincinnati for Thanksgiving, which was the following week. And, so we decided to keep in touch while we were both in town, but we didn't. And so when I went to get on my flight back down to Florida that following week after Thanksgiving, the guy was on my flight. And I walked into the airport, into my gate, and I saw him standing there. And I tell you, I wanted to run in the opposite direction because I knew in my gut it was my time to get well. And I was scared. And but I didn't run. I got on the plane and I sat next to him. We switched our seats, and he told me his full story of alcoholism and recovery. And I had so much hope. And the next week, he sent me the information I needed to find my own meetings. We lived about an hour apart down in South Florida. And it turns out there was an amazing women's meeting within walking distance to the apartment that I was living in. So the next week, I went to my first meeting, and I have not found it necessary to take a drink of alcohol ever since. And my life in recovery is amazing. I mean, really, it's hard to put into words because to say what's different, honestly, everything's different. I'm different. It's funny, a lot of the people in my life that were in my life then, they're like, Laura, you were fun. You like to party. We never knew you had a problem. The suffering was so internal for me. And the people closest to me, they did suffer. But to just not have that internal suffering alone is such a gift. And, today, not only am I in recovery, but I'm helping people get into recovery. And, I've become a wife. I'm a mom. I have a career. I'm reliable. I'm a good friend. I show up for people.